But to react now, let me bring in Peter Whittle for today's Uncancelled interview. And it is wonderful to have Peter here for the first time here on Outspoken on a massive news day. He is, of course, the founder and director of the New Culture Forum, which I really recommend you follow on YouTube. He is also the leader of the Brexit Alliance. He served on the London Assembly for 5 years up until 2021, and he is one of those voices in Britain unafraid to tackle these difficult issues. And Peter Whittle, goodness me, quite a chilling press conference in a lot of ways from Keir Starmer. Because I don't know what your analysis is, but my takeaway is that we're being told, don't talk about what happened in Southport. Simply do not speculate. Do not look into the reasoning why. Just grieve. Yes. And if you dare do speculate, you will be punished by the social media giants because the government is going to crack down on them.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on, Dan. It's great to be with you. As you said, I think a bit earlier, this is exactly as we would expect it to be. You know, the way that, in fact, people now are being handled. And I think my main concern really is that with all of the incidents that we've seen, and actually going back for quite a long way now, there is a feeling of people being managed and handled. And it has led to a situation where the level of kind of general anger that there is and frustration amongst, I would say, the majority of people has reached a pitch. Now, there's no question in my mind that one of the most important things there to cause that has actually been what is obviously two-tier policing. That is that you go hard on some people and you basically kid gloves on other people. You mentioned there the London Assembly, which I was on for 5 years. The point of the London Assembly, I would add, is that we get to scrutinise people like Sadiq Khan, the mayor, and indeed the chief of police, the police commissioner, which in my time was Cressida Dick. And I brought this up many times because it became quite clear to me as far back as 2020, when we saw policemen, taking the knee at a BLM rally, and then followed by quite harsh treatment of counter demonstrations who came down to essentially protect statues in London. It became quite clear to me that the whole approach was sort of quite different. It was the same as well with Extinction Rebellion. I know we're not talking about that particularly today, but essentially, same thing. They somehow or other were allowed to get very near to the cenotaph, Dan. And also we saw police laughing and joking around with Extinction Rebellion. There are some causes and some sections of society who are treated more carefully. Now, obviously, we saw that hugely during the Gaza demonstrations.
Indeed. Now, given you've raised this, Peter, I've actually put together some footage of the past 24 hours. So what I want to do is play some examples and we'll discuss as we go. So here is some evidence of probably the most shocking piece of police aggression last night, which took place on the streets of Westminster, not far from Downing Street, where seemingly a completely innocent white man was subjected to real brutality without much pushback at all. So have a look at this. We're back. And there was another example of some police aggression too in Westminster. Watch this. Now, Peter, we have not seen that. As you rightly point out, for the eco-extremists, I call them eco-terrorists, to be honest, and the fact that they're now being sent to prison, I think, proves my definition right. We did not see that, as you point out, with the Black Lives Matter protests, where the police literally took the knee. We did not see that with the Palestinian protests. And by the way, we certainly didn't see it after the riots. I know it's a different police force, but we didn't see it after the riots in Hare Hills, where we literally saw officers run away. So why is it, Peter, that you think the police feel far more comfortable when they're dealing with, and I hate the term, by the way, because I think far right is just a catch-all term now that can be used for you. It can be used for me. It can be used for Nigel Farage. What does far right actually even mean? But it certainly feels like two-tier policing, does it not?
Yes, it does. I mean, the first point I'd make actually on this about the far right is that, and this is crucial, I think people realize this, or if they don't, they've got to, is that every criticism, every challenge to the official narrative will be called far right. It's not just these demonstrations. Anything now, the whole way in which these things are described has been shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. They've done it very successfully by basically taking over the language. And so essentially, if you are in any way concerned or worried, whether it's migration, whether it is Islamic fundamentalism, whatever it might be, you will be far right. Okay, so we have to sort of accept that that's what we're working with. Obviously, looking at these pictures, which I think are appalling, there is a sense in which I feel that the police somehow are more frightened of certain groups than others. And they feel that they sort of have almost carte blanche in a way to deal with those men last night in Downing Street, as you just saw. They have sort of carte blanche almost to do that more. When we saw...
Well, because they're white, though. Because they're white. Because let's just be clear about it. In Manchester, recently, when we saw that apparent example of police brutality, which was actually probably quite justified in context once we saw the footage of what had happened before and the police being attacked. But the difference was, presumably because these were non-white, quote-unquote, victims of police brutality, there was some sort of desire to create a George Floyd-style movement in the UK. That guy last night is a white man, so no one cares about the police brutality?
Well, they do. But the problem is that our establishment doesn't. And the fact is that the establishment, as you have pointed out, I'm sure many times, has a narrative which cannot be challenged. You know, so therefore, one thing actually, Dan, that strikes me about all of this actually is that if you call it the left or the liberal left or whatever you want to call it, people who basically run the show in our institutions, they do not give an inch in any of the arguments. They do not accept there might be problems in any of the kind of issues that we talk about. They never do. They never give any room at all. And this has led to this kind of sense of extraordinary frustration and anger. Now, look, you know, I'm quite clear that there is absolutely, you know, it is wrong to attack people with bricks and all of that. We all kind of know that.
Yes.
But the left are very, very interested. The left are very interested in context on the whole, aren't they? We hear a lot about context now. So you have to look at the context in which this is actually all being done. And it's been done basically because it's been growing and growing for years now, where incidents happen, as you mentioned, like the soldier down in Gillingham being horrifically attacked. Suddenly it sort of disappears from the news agenda.
Yep.
And all of the issues are then put onto the people who are demonstrating. I don't know whether they are EDL or whether they're not. I mean, I suspect, I thought the EDL is actually no longer even in existence, Dan. I don't know.
Well, yes.
But
and of course, we've now got the mainstream media lobbying for these organisations to be banned at the press conference today. There were other examples, Peter, though, on the streets last night. One particularly shocking moment where a 73-year-old woman with a pacemaker who said that she was on the streets simply because she was devastated by the killing of the 3 young girls in Southport, but found herself being arrested. It's extraordinary footage. Watch what happened.
Run into me. You've just all. I've got a pacemaker. I've got a pacemaker. I've got a pacemaker. And they've just arrested me for walking up here.
No, to reach the section 35.
Oh, because you want to do them any tighter?
That's why I'm trying to lock them so they can stop getting tight.
Well, actually, you're really tightening them.
Well, I'm not.
You really are tightening them, and you're really making me. You what?
So can you relax?
You joking?
5 seconds.
Are you joking? I've never been arrested in my life.
Madam.
I have, don't you miss, don't you. I have never been arrested in my life. I'm 73 years old. And I have come here because of them babies who's died. And I am being arrested.
And then we saw Martin Daubney from GB News nearly be arrested at Westminster. What is going on?
Yes, the police, it's one of the oldest rules in the book, Dan, is that the police should police with neither fear nor favour. You might have heard that expression. It's one of the old principles of policing. That is entirely gone, it seems to me. They are now in a position where they are just managing what is effectively kind of breaking down. And I think there's an element of fear in it, in the sense that with the Gaza demonstrations, huge, hundreds of thousands of people screaming extremist rubbish, hateful rubbish about this country, from the river to the sea, all of this, climbing over all of our monuments. That was allowed to happen. And it was sort of tacitly even accepted, I believe, by a policeman who was caught on social media saying, well, there's more of them than there are of us, right? Now, in a way, people like that lady that you just showed in the clip, they're sort of fair game. You can almost hear what your average liberal establishment member will be saying about her when they see that. I mean, I think there's a kind of general contempt as well for working class people, especially white working class people, that is abroad. It's basically been there now in the culture for quite some time. There's almost nothing you can't say about them. You can certainly call them far right. And this is a huge worry because the police, our police we've always had a pretty good relationship with our police on the whole. And that's one of the reasons for that, is that they came on the whole out of the very class and out of the very community of people that they have to police. And so we always had a kind of good relationship. That is entirely gone. Honestly, now, I'm a kind of very typical English guy. I respected the police and all of this. That is entirely gone now. I don't trust them at all. And I don't think they're on my side. And I think that we're going to see that basically being illustrated more and more over the,
which is terrible, though, as you say, because I understand it. Let's see how the police have acted in certain situations. I get it, but it is terrible when there is such incredible police bravery on days like Monday in Southport. So it is so sad that we have seen that breakdown. But it's not just coming from the police, as you well know, Peter. It's also coming directly from this new socialist government. And I want to show you the comparison of the new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, who I believe is already doing a disastrous job. And this is a comparison of how she referred to the protests after, or the riots actually, after Hare Hills when police were attacked, compared to the riots in Southport this week. And while the words are relatively similar, there's a real difference in her tone and her passion when she's speaking about the Muslim and Gypsy protesters compared to the white working class protesters.
Well, I've been talking to West Yorkshire police officers and also local community leaders about the action they're now taking in response to those unacceptable scenes of disorder and criminality that we saw last night. The community is working very closely together in response to what was a local child protection incident, but it's really important that the community can feel safe on the streets and also that the perpetrators feel the full force of the law.
Short time ago.
So appalling to now see those same police facing violent attacks from thugs on the streets who have no respect for a grieving community. It's a total disgrace. Frankly, this is a time when everyone should be showing respect for a community and for the police.
Completely different tone, Peter.
It's just utterly laughable. And, you know, it makes me so angry, Dan, when you hear these people like Yvette Cooper saying that they show, you know, that they're showing no respect to the grieving families. I would say that this government and governments before over a number of years now have shown no respect actually to the wishes of communities such as in Hare Hills, none at all. They don't take into consideration any of their views. They have been demonized, particularly by sort of people like Yvette Cooper and her crew. And I think that basically it beggars belief that when you watch even, what's his name, Keir Starmer, going up there and laying a wreath, in tribute, he walks this kind of ceremonial walk and he doesn't even stop to even talk to anybody. Or indeed listened about why they might be heckling him. You know, unbelievable, lack.
Exactly, and that anger, which is visceral. And by the way, I have felt it all week. I have felt so angry all week, Peter, and I am so sick of being told, don't look back in anger. We can only grieve. We've got to be sad. No. I'm sorry. I am angry. Now, that anger has to be harnessed in the right way. The right way is not throwing bricks at police officers, but arguably, actually, the right way is potentially, I wouldn't call it heckling, actually. I would call it shouting questions at the Prime Minister, which the media are not asking him because the media are in the tank for Keir Starmer, and you know that if it was a Conservative Prime Minister, they would be asking those questions, or if it was a Reform UK Prime Minister, maybe now we should start saying they would be asking those questions. But, those hecklers who Starmer and the mainstream media have just dismissed were asking questions, Peter, like, how many more children have to die? Surely that is a question that we should be asking. And what makes me sick, Peter, honestly, it makes me so angry. Look at the questions today from the corrupt mainstream media, the British Bashing Corporation, Channel 4, ITV News, Sly News. None of them were about how can we stop this violent extremism, this terror on our streets that is leading to the death of young children. None of the questions were about that. They were all about Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, social media crackdowns and disinformation. I just find that such a dereliction of duty by our mainstream media. It makes me so mad.
Well, it's yes, exactly. It is quite unbelievable, but at the same time, not unbelievable. I'd say to you, Dan, we might disagree on this a bit. This happens to be the latest incarnation of it, this Labour government. I don't remember the Conservative government particularly covering themselves in glory over the past few years on these kind of issues either. I mean, and the media, just forget about the media. They are essentially the message carriers. You know this better than many people, Dan. And essentially they are cut from the same cloth when it comes to views, right? I think that the problem is, you see, is that all of our institutions, whether it's the police, whether it's the media, whether it's the judicial system, whether it's all the cultural institutions, they've all essentially been hollowed out. They now have the same kind of people running them. They all sing from the same hymn sheet. In the context of the police, for example, the chief the police chiefs, as it were, called his own forces institutionally racist, for example. And
there's no coming back from that, is there?
There's no. I mean, he called them that. Basically, the police were called institutionally racist, famously after the McPherson report. It's this kind of charge which you could never disprove, and that's the pernicious thing about it. But the main point about that is that it seems to me that since that report, they have their whole modus operandi is in showing how they are not racist, right? Mm-hmm. So that means that you go harder on, people like the demonstrations that you've just illustrated, and you ease off on the others. That seems to be their whole modus operandi. People are wise to that now. They're wise to it. And I think that, in a way, the problem is that when information is kept from people, like in the most recent case, although actually now they've named the guy, as you said.
After a challenge from the media.
After a challenge, there are a lot of people on social media saying, these demonstrators thought it might be Muslims or whatever it is. In a way, this is the kind of incoherence that happens when you just don't tell people things.
Exactly, which would never happen, Peter, in America, where they have complete open access to the justice system and information, and actually you are allowed to have these sorts of debates. Now, the other thing is, this guy wasn't named initially, Peter. Now, I know he has been now after this challenge from the Mail, but he wasn't named because he's 17 years old. Well, Slippery Starmer and Labour want to give votes to 16-year-olds. They intend to enfranchise 16-year-olds. So I'm sorry, if a 16-year-old is able to vote, according to Starmer, then they are able to be named if they are charged with stabbing to death 3 young girls.
Absolutely. It is... there is no logic to this situation now. There's no logic to it. I suspect that apparently he's 18 in 6 days or something.
Yeah.
But apparently, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually decided to lift these court restrictions, almost to sort of maybe try and stem further trouble.
Well, yeah, but you know what's so frustrating to me? And the great thing about being independent, Peter, is that I intend to be completely transparent with my audience, because there were times when I was working at GB News and the Daily Mail, and you'd be told something by the bosses, and I would want to explain it to the audience, but you'd been told, oh no, you just can't talk about that. And obviously, look, in the end, it got me in trouble and I exited, didn't I? But in this case, I am reading information about the 17-year-old who has been charged. I am actually looking at text messages from people who were at his school, for example. Now, I have not been able to independently verify them. But Peter, even if I did, I would, because of the reporting restrictions, I would not be allowed to talk about it on this show, because I could be thrown in jail in the UK under contempt of court. So firstly, that means I think we are operating in a regime of censorship. That's the first thing. Clearly, the Labour government intends to crack down on that even further. But it also means this is why the so-called disinformation is spread, because how ludicrous that I can't talk about truthful information, but I'm seeing it being shared on social media. So Starmer's solution, Jess Phillips' solution is let's crack down on social media. My solution would be no, let's open up the exchange of information and let's actually acknowledge that we are in a new world where it's completely impossible now to say, oh, we're not going to say anything about this guy for 6 months, for 9 months. I mean, it could be 12 months, Peter, before he actually faces trial, depending on if he pleads guilty or not, etc., etc.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you there, Dan. I think that, one of the things that people, obviously, we have to say this, and of course it's right, the people's, civil disturbances or whatever, we don't want to go down that route. But at the same time, when you look at the way in which people have been completely ignored and completely demonized, and I'm talking about working class people here, white working class people, utterly demonized, for even bringing up any kind of concern, let alone going on a protest. And it's happened as well, Dan, during a time when we've been culturally sort of under attack. I mean, from different angles, the sort of things that you have obviously covered on your various programs. But, the very notion of why one should be proud to be British, proud to be English, our history, all of these things over the past, 5 years have come under sustained and systematic attack, right? So people are extremely demoralized, right? Every day there is something. Add to that the fact that they are not allowed or not meant to actually question anything such as mass immigration or multiculturalism or Islamic fundamentalism, any of these things. Add to that, it is absolutely brought people, I think, many people, to boiling point.
Yes, and Peter, they want to stop us even being allowed to have this conversation.
Oh yes,
they have already cracked down on GB News, which was my former employer. It was challenging the narrative far too much. I had to go, Mark Stein had to go, Lawrence Fox had to go, Calvin Robinson had to go. We've seen a massive change there. And now they want to crack down on our ability to speak freely here. And seriously, if they try, good luck to them, because we will fight. I will, if we have to go into almost like, Peter, a pirate radio sort of existence where I have to broadcast from an overseas territory in order to get the truth into the UK, I will do that. But it's so disturbing that this is the sort of language that we're hearing just 4 weeks into this government. I mean, I knew it was going to be bad, but my God.
But also with this government, this past week, of course, it's completely been, sort of ignored under what, quite rightly, under what's happened, recently in these terrible murders. But they've actually dropped, for example, Dan, the new free speech precautions that were set up, in universities. Universities are one of the worst places for censoring of free speech. This was to have a free speech czar, to put in possible kind of safeguards about free speech in university, of all places, universities. They've just done away with it. And like you, I have, a very, very successful YouTube channel. Of course, it worries us. It worries us. We talk about these issues all the time. What is in store for us? Who knows?
No, I know, it's really terrifying. Look, just one piece of breaking news, breaking right now. We have now heard from the judge in the case today involving Axel Rudakubana, and he has explained, Peter, why he decided to allow the media to name him. And he has said that it is because of the idiotic rioting going at the moment is in part fed by the nonsense online that feeds on the vacuum. So he described it as an exceptional decision, given that the defendant doesn't turn 18 until next Wednesday. But he said by continuing to prevent full reporting at this stage has the disadvantage of allowing others who are up to mischief to continue to spread misinformation in a vacuum, and runs the risk that when the information becomes publicly available in 6 days' time, that will provide an additional excuse for a fresh round of public disorder. So that's the judge's rationale for allowing us to name this 17-year-old. But it looks like, Peter, they were going to allow us to name him next Wednesday because he's so close to turning 18.
Right. Yes, well, just as I just said, it seems it's pretty much consistent with what I just said, Dan. I think that they're just sort of doing it as a kind of just thinking, they might be advised, this could lead to even more kind of rioting, more civil disturbances, and so let's just do this. That seems to be what they have done. But I think, as you said, it's a question of general transparency.
Yeah, because we still can't talk. Let's just be very clear about this, Peter, right? As mainstream journalists, we still cannot talk about what this man's motivations might have been. We can't reveal the text messages that he may have sent. There is still a vacuum effectively. Now, Keir Starmer today says that's because of our justice system, and it is. That's how our justice system works. But I guess I would argue whether in 2024 that makes any sense, Peter, because what that means is people will only be able to get that information online via social media sites. They're not going to be able to get it formally.
Maybe in the past as well, you might have had a few intrepid local reporters who dug away and maybe took a risk, but in fact, they've all gone. I mean, we don't have any good local.
No.
Going the same with the papers about it.
But what's so frustrating, because remember, I've worked in newspapers for years, and what happens is the journalists are actually allowed. I mean, it's interesting, maybe people don't know how this works, but the journalists are allowed to gather all of the information about this 17-year-old charged now, so they can go and speak to family members if they want, speak to fellow students, speak to teachers, speak to ex-girlfriends. They can literally do all of that. They can film the interviews, they can have them recorded, but they cannot publish until he either pleads guilty or is found guilty or not guilty. That's how it works. Now, the problem is that's going to be in a year's time. Peter, a million things in this country will have happened by then. And that is my issue. People move on so quickly because of our news cycle. So that's why I actually think Keir Starmer has been a dishonest actor in this case by trying to tell us today, oh, look, we just need to grieve for the moment. Don't worry, we'll get to talk about this. No, we won't. No, we won't. Yeah. The court case will come and go. It will be a story once he's found guilty. But effectively, we do move on too quickly.
Yeah. I think, I do hope that basically more people wake up, actually, about it. I'm not, again, one has to keep saying this, but it is the truth. It doesn't mean that you should go and start attacking the police. It doesn't mean all of that stuff. It doesn't. But I think that, thank goodness, in a way, actually, for social media, as much as I might sort of criticize it, because without that, we wouldn't actually get to know, we wouldn't be able to put pressure on.
Yeah.
Start.
No, exactly. Look, there are so many ills of social media. I mean, I was a massive victim of it last year, where false information about me spread. It was completely untrue. I knew it was untrue. I knew that it would provably be I knew that it would be proven to be untrue, which has happened, but it's very difficult when things catch like wildfire. But the problem is, we don't want to live in a world of censorship either. That's too important. Now, look, Peter, stand by. You're going to be back with me in just a minute. Two other massive news stories today. First, can you believe this? At the Olympics, a female boxer effectively forced out of the competition after being beaten up by a biological man. All of the reaction to that. Plus, this Hugh Edwards cover-up is growing by the day, and some suggestion that Jill Dando may have been murdered because she knew about a paedophile ring at the BBC. So we'll discuss all of that in just 1 minute time. But first, And now, back to the show. And Peter Whittle, the director and founder of the New Culture Forum, is back with me. Absolute fury today, Peter, over the Algerian boxer Amain Khalif, who, despite being banned last year outside of the Olympics, was allowed to take on Italy's Angela Carini. Now, why this is so shocking is, let's just be completely honest about it, Amain Khalif is a man.
Yes,
so
exactly.
A man punching Angela Carini. The fight was abandoned after just 46 seconds. Heartbreaking images. Angela crying, completely broken down. And J.K. Rowling tweeted about this. Could any picture sum up our new men's rights movement better? The smirk of a male who knows he's protected by a misogynist sporting establishment, enjoying the distress of a woman he's just punched in the head, and whose life's ambition he's just shattered. Sharon Davies, good friend of the show, she was on just before the Olympics talking about this, said this is a biological male fighting a female, and absolutely everyone can see it. They have also failed gender screening twice and have XY chromosomes. And Peter, what's so shocking about this is South Park actually predicted it would happen. Watch. Now, I watched an emotional interview, Peter, afterwards, and she said she did this for her dad. She fought with blood in her eyes. But shame on the BBC. Look at how they covered this story, Peter. They said, boxer Khalif progresses after opponent abandons. A completely intellectually dishonest take on reporting what is, I believe, a scandal that puts women's sport under the biggest threat ever.
Well, yes. I mean, Dan, actually, there was another one. I saw a few headlines from different newspapers in which they were reporting this incident, this fight, and they were still referring to the guy as her and she.
Yes. Yes, the BBC did it throughout. The Daily Mail has done it today.
Yeah, Daily Mail. And I mean, basically, this is part of the problem, actually. I mean, they're all in on this kind of lie. In a terrible way, in an awful way, this almost had to happen, Dan. It had to happen for people to see the sheer insanity of what we are tolerating. I think everything that J.K. Rowling has said is totally vindicated. She had my support from the start, but basically totally vindicated. This was a man, as you say, fighting and hurting a woman. And essentially, it is being allowed for ideological reasons. This physical harm is now fine because it is for ideological purposes, which is the whole trans movement. And I think that this actually sort of had to happen. It's so visceral. When people see it, they will see, no.
This can't go on.
Yeah.
In boxing, I mean, one of the most dangerous sports, it's complete insanity. But Peter, of course, this has been an Olympics beset by controversy after the ridiculous and actually really horrific opening ceremony that saw a whole load of bearded drag queens and scantily clad artists mock the Last Supper.
I know. It was quite spectacularly vulgar, the whole thing, from start to finish. It also just showed you a kind of culture that, frankly, has completely lost confidence in itself, I'm afraid, as we've had in the West. But with that particular thing, with the particular Last Supper thing, they're now saying it was a Dionysian feast or whatever. I mean, this is
sure they are.
Yeah, sure they are. But I mean, the fact is, I think the central woman, like the woman in the middle, I suppose she's meant to be Jesus or whatever. Actually, she was quite clear about it, actually, in various different bits and pieces on social media that came out, which was she think, oh, this is the new gay testament or something like that. Frankly, it's hollow. It's hollow, isn't it? Who gives a damn? Just because you're in drag, or just because you're non-binary or whatever. What? So what? You know what?
And they only apologized, Peter, and they've only rode back because some American advertisers started to pull out, and it's America that effectively funds the Olympic Games via its massive TV deals.
Yeah.
The other big scandal, of course, is the growing cover-up at the BBC, the cover-up corporation, as I call it now. It was the BBC's own Newsnight show that reported last night that the BBC had known for 9 months exactly what Hugh Edwards was facing over that time. They still provided him with a £40,000 pay rise. But Peter, people are looking much closer now at the BBC overall because it has this history of harbouring sex offenders, but specifically paedophiles too, or at least people with some sort of urging in that direction. And people have been pointing to me today to the murder of Jill Dando, which, let's be completely honest about it, remains unsolved. And back in the 90s, she was apparently looking into exposing a paedophile ring at the BBC, and that could have been one of the reasons that she was targeted. So it really does feel like, Peter, that there's been an ingrained problem with this issue at the BBC for many years. Why? And actually, is it just time to start again? I mean, is there any way that this organisation can regain any sense of moral authority after this?
Well, I think possibly what it is, pure speculation on my part, is that these people become untouchable, don't they? The BBC, isn't that it really? That Hugh Edwards was, great broadcaster, announced the Queen's death, coronation of the new king, all of those great events, and indeed general elections. They become kind of untouchable. I don't know much about Hugh Edwards, other than what I've been reading about the past few days in terms of as a character, is that basically nobody would have thought. You know what I mean? I know it sounds like a banal observation, but that there was never any kind of hint of anything like this. But I think in terms of the BBC,
but people at the BBC knew, though. I mean, I'm not saying they knew that he had pictures of a 7 to 9-year-old on his phone, but they knew that there had been various complaints and all of that sort of thing.
Yes,
and you'd think after the Jimmy Savile cover-up, they wouldn't take this sort of risk again.
Yes, you would. And certainly not give someone a raise,
Yeah, and what do you make of this suggestion that actually it could be worth looking back into Jill Dando's claim of a paedophile ring at the BBC?
Well, I mean, that was in 1999, wasn't it, Dan? She was murdered. I mean, if there's anything in that, then it's a colossal thing, isn't it? I mean,
well, yeah, and the thing is, but can't you argue that she was right, Peter? Because at that point, the BBC was already covering up for Jimmy Savile.
Yes.
And he absolutely was a paedophile. And we since know that there have been many more, who have gone to jail, especially from that time, be it Chris Denning or Stuart Hall, there's a long list. So I don't know. Look, Jill Dando's murder remains unsolved, and I personally think it would at least be an area to look into, given that there does seem to be a problem. Let's just be frank about it with the BBC and paedophilia.
Yes. Yeah. No. Maybe it should be looked into. I didn't realise, she'd actually had brought it up as an issue with. I think the problems for the BBC go much wider than this, if you like.
Yes.
Maybe a different discussion, but I think that whether or not it will survive as it is, which I think is most unlikely. I mean, I think that maybe within 10 years we won't see it as it is now.
Well, it doesn't deserve to survive, actually. And the thing that's most sickening is that folk like me, who do not watch the BBC, but I do like every now and then to watch another form of terrestrial television, we are forced to continue to pay for this, which means effectively paying for Hugh Edwards' pay rise. I mean, it's so wrong.
I suppose the way I guess is very wrong. I find that where I get angry, because I no longer have a TV actually, but where I got more and more angry was the fact that I was paying for essentially propaganda, political propaganda coming through in comedy, in drama, and not just on the news. And that after a while, used to make me so angry that I just stopped.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. And actually, to round off our conversation, Peter, we've seen it over the past 24 hours when the BBC decided, let's send our BBC Verify team in to blame, to blame the internet effectively for what happened in Southport.
Exactly.
It's so typical.
Somebody you might like to discuss at some point, they've just taken on, it was announced today, I think it's a new gender.
Oh, I saw this.
Yes, he's a gender reporter.
Yeah.
And I think it was Gareth Roberts on Twitter very cleverly pointed out, she's got a great story on her first day, hasn't she, with this boxing fight?
Yeah, but that's not the type of story that the BBC wants to cover. They like to cover stories about transphobia rather than stories about men being allowed to beat women up at the Olympics. But look, Peter, perfect guest for us on a really busy news day. As I say, I really recommend everyone go and subscribe to the New Culture Forum on YouTube. Incredible discussions which are really intellectual, but also entertaining on the big issues of our time. It is a must follow YouTube page, and it's such a pleasure to have you. Hope you'll come back soon, Peter.
I'd love to, Dan. Thank you very much.
Peter Whittle, the director and founder of the New Culture Forum.